I think this whole thing uh, seems to come down to regaining your innocence. The word innocence, and most importantly, what it points to, seems to be really the fruition of these insights and the fruition of doing the shadow work, which go hand in hand at some point. Innocence meaning we don't have to know what comes next to enjoy this moment. We don't have to imagine who we are or try to remember who we are and how we relate to the world to move fluidly in this moment. We don't have to have agendas about how things should go or could go to simply enjoy being alive right now. And maybe most importantly, we don't have to hold on to an apparent past. I think we do that without realizing it, holding on to a past or holding on to I guess like the trailing edge of this experience. I think it's reasonably subconscious doing that for some time, for a lot of our life. But we also don't realize, like, you just don't have to do that. You can be fresh in this moment again and again and again, over and over. Waking up in this moment again and again, over and over. You can be reborn in this moment over and over and over. That kind of rebirth isn't really one event that marks the timeline of your life. It's something that's happening in perpetuity, happening ongoing. If I could say what marks freedom experientially with anatta, non-dual realization, no self-realization, if I could say what marks freedom, it kind of seems to be that there's no past, that there's no trailing anything. There's just no need to hold on at all. It's like, in a way I could say holding on, which would be holding on to the past, because what else can you hold on to? The present isn't something you could hold on to. By the time you're thinking about holding on, it's the past, right? So it's almost as if the tendency to hold on is kind of antithetical to being fully available here, fully present here, fully alive here. I also think that the recognition and acceptance of death plays into this in a very important way. Sometimes I'll interact with somebody who's cleared out a lot of perceptual filters and they have a lot of clarity, done a lot of shadow work. They're very present and the insights are pretty clear, but there's still something kind of tethering that they notice. And a lot of times I'll point to death. It doesn't even have to be in some, I don't know, super spiritual, existential way of speaking about death. It's probably something that our fellow species members who live in more native cultures or indigenous cultures are really aware of and not afraid of and not trying to live as if it's not the case because it's just around them, you know? I don't know that for sure, but that seems like something we've lost, our contact and acceptance of death as just part of the cycle of life and death and seasons and all of it. Everything's cyclic, right? And we've sort of lost that. And maybe we celebrate that we've lost it in a way. Like we think that's giving us some kind of benefit to pretend we don't die. Or to conveniently overlook the fact that we're kind of dying all the time. But I think there's a huge cost to that. The cost is something simple and reasonably energetic, I would say, and it's right here. And that is that there's this knowing of dying all the time. Just letting go, letting go, letting go. Maybe I could even say it this way. You as a me, as a seeming separate self, probably can't actually let go in this way. So part of the answer is to solve the problem of birth and death. Part of the answer is realization, non-dual realization, and then anatta. Because without that, you will feel like you actively have to hold a self together. But once you see that that's not the case, then it's just more like a tendency, just a little tug to stay in some kind of timeline, instead of just really seeing that letting go is not an act, doesn't come in the future, but it's just intrinsic to experience. Dissolving is intrinsic to experience. Relinquishing, non-grasping, all of it. None of those are acts, really. You could practice them. You can practice non-grasping, perhaps. You could practice letting go. You could practice death meditation, all these things. But really, they're intrinsic to experience. They're intrinsic to this aliveness and the innocence. I think a lot of people can recognize, I certainly can, certain periods during your childhood, moments where you realize you're going to die at some point, like in a very conscious way, you realize like, oh, at some point this body's going to die. And the kind of existential fear that comes with that, we can probably all recognize that. And in one sense, maybe that's like the end of innocence, or it's the kind of forgetting of innocence when we realize, oh, we can actually dissociate from that fear. We can build a self on top of the fear. We can build an identity on top of the fear. Sure, I know I'm going to die, but let me just not think about that. And let me instead think about something else. Let me think about the future. Let me think about plans. Let me think about, right? All that seems so innocent, and it kind of is innocent, sure. But that fundamental innocence of just being alive, I think gets filtered out there to various degrees. And then we build more layers on top of it without even realizing it. But it is true freedom to not just be willing to let go, not just practice letting go, but to actually let go. And again, it's not maybe even a thing you can do as a you necessarily, not at the deepest level. It's necessary for the realization to be clear, for that to happen at all. And then beyond that, it's more of like being sensitive and curious about what it is that could even seem to hold on at all, and seeing that that's not there. Then you see that the letting go of the non-grasping is intrinsic to being alive. It's intrinsic to experience. And that really does mark freedom in my experience, because you're never truly free when you're bound to an illusion, and the past is an illusion. And it feels really good to be free. It feels childlike. Feels innocent. It doesn't feel naive. It doesn't feel dissociated. It doesn't feel numb at all. It feels vulnerable, but also innocent, meaning there's an intelligence maybe to innocence that we know it feels natural to not grasp. It feels natural to not hold on. So it is kind of like death all the time in some sense. It's not like, the horror of going through a physical death. I don't mean that. I just mean that it's not that physical death has to be a horror, but a lot of times we would associate that. It's not that. It's not that you have to constantly remember that your physical body is going to die or imagine it dying. It's seeing clearly through naturalness that death is literally part of life. It is. Birth and death are like so interwoven. There's death all around us. Everything is decaying and falling apart, and also appearing and falling apart, and here and dissolving into nowhere, like all the time, everything at every level. You put it in a relative sense, like your body has to kill bacteria all the time to stay alive, viruses all the time to stay alive. One way or another, we end up killing other living creatures to sustain ourselves, even if we're vegan. Like actions we take, places we live, things we eat, we are effectively killing other things, living beings. And other living beings are going to get their energy from the death and decay of this body as well, of course. And that's happening everywhere, all the time, at all levels. And it's beautiful. But if you try to step out of that, try to be something separate from all of that, from all those cycles, from what's clear and obvious and not mystical, that death is all around us. You try to step back from that, dissociate from that. It may give a momentary hit of release or relief or something, but it's a release or relief based on an illusion. So it comes with it a binding, comes with it a contraction or a heaviness. And then, as we all know, it builds and builds and builds from there, layer after layer of identity, until we're really dissociated, we're really numb. And strangely, we think we've got it to get the more we think we have it together, often the more diluted we are, really. So all that stuff gets built on top of that fundamental misperception that I need to dodge death somehow. Ain't gonna happen. So maybe I'll just put it this way. What would it be like? What could it feel like? And many people watching this probably experience this. But what could it be like to be completely fresh in this moment, experiencing it just as it is, not adding to it, not subtracting from it, but not dragging the corpse of the past into this moment either, letting go of all of the weight and just feeling, seeing, laughing, drinking, crying, eating, seeing the sky for the first time again, smelling flower for the first time again. And then all of that's gone, dead, dissolved, gone. And then there's the next thing, whatever it is. The earth, the ground, an ant crawling across the ground. To be fully available for that, in that, as that, feeling it, feeling the intimacy of aliveness, but not holding on to any previous moment, because there isn't one, and there's no one to hold on. So there's just that aliveness of this appearance. And then gone. Totally gone. Then sound, music, movement, dancing, body sensations, taking a shower, taking a bath, feeling, sensation, smell, gone. But you will realize, like, this is how how a young child lives. They're not imagining a self most of the time, when especially very young. They're just alive. They really laugh. They really cry. They really play. They really sleep hard. They really wake up and are fully exuberant. All of that is just full on, yeah? And that's no reason at all you can't live that way. Even with the aches and pains of growing older. definitely can feel the innocence. Because the innocence doesn't require anything of conditions to be this way or that way. That's an important key. The adult mind is too complex. It'll say, oh, well, sure, children have this and that, but they have health and they have protection from their parents and they don't have to make decisions and blah, 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 right? Don't dirty it up with the dirty little fingers of thought. You don't need to. Sure, the adult life is more complex in some way. But conventionally speaking. But in this moment, there's no complexity. Look through your eyes. See the colors and forms and shapes and the scenery. It's the same the child sees. It's the same as a newborn baby sees. But the newborn baby really sees. You see through a veil, right? If you're mind identified. So, see with the newborn's eyes. Feel with the child's heart. It's totally available to you. How much time do you spend playing? Maybe some people here spend a lot of time playing, like really playing though. I don't mean self-soothing either, by the way. I don't mean distraction. Just playing. Esho, the Zen nun, used a really cool phrase. She said, she teaches Qigong and stuff, and she was guiding the group through Qigong, and she said, do you remember when you were a kid and you would use your body like a toy? I thought that was so full on, so true. How often do you use your body like a toy? You can still do it. Totally. So do it. Play. Be silly. Move without any thought of why you're moving. Laugh because you feel like laughing. Feel the laughter. And be that laughter. When you eat, taste it. Really taste that. Those flavors, they're like a miracle. So much depth there. And, you know, as I mentioned before, for this to be an ongoing, clear realization, it does require certain insights, you know, and those insights aren't not gained. They're net losses, loss of an illusion, loss of a filter. And this is why I do talk about things in certain stages. And I talk about subject, object, you know, construct and form and emptiness and all these things we can investigate and dissolve barriers, dissolve illusions, dissolve presuppositions. All of that can happen. And then it's so much clearer then for all of this. What a relief when you don't have to be a self in relation to anything anymore. I don't have to be a self in relation to the taste. So just taste. And it's always, always clearer and more flavorful and more intimate and more enjoyable when you're not trying to be a self in relation to it. Always. I don't make many statements that are like always or universal, but it's universally true. When there's just taste, it's not even close to the experience of being a taster. You can still taste as a self, but you don't realize how much it's getting filtered out. It's the same with everything. Movement, play, emotion. That's one of the things that is a challenge as we're going through shadow work, is seeing that, sure, I like to feel one with everything, but do you like to feel one with rage? There's no one backing away from that rage. There's no one who can mitigate it. It's just rage. Or grief, you know? So a lot of times when I have conversations with people about who are going through shadow work, I'm really mostly just trying to reacquaint them with the experience directly. That's all it is, really. But there's often this other part that it's kind of shining through a little bit, and that's that they have an expectation they're going to get past it. But it's not about being past anything. It's just about not holding back from anything. And when you are able to do that, reasonably continuously, then you see there's nothing you have to get past. There's nothing that has to stop happening. There's nothing that's a problem. Emotions aren't a problem. Sensations aren't a problem. Sound isn't a problem. Movement isn't a problem. Restlessness isn't a problem. They're experiences. They're momentary. But they're, I should say, maybe more like appearances. Because if I want to be really specific, experience collapses into presence. So maybe spend more time around children and animals and watch how they move, especially babies, watch how they look, how they stare. You also could notice in moments like that some resistance of your own even, yeah? Because part of you does sense that that's a really unguarded place that they exist. Child, an animal, very vulnerable. Even a powerful animal that could harm a human, they're rather vulnerable in some way that the mind-identified human isn't. But they're good teachers. Through resonance. Through intuition. Feeling into their energy.